Welcome to our house, the House of Fi. At the House of Fi, we are all about achieving financial independence for families. Wherever you are in your financial independence journey, we want our house to be a place where you can learn and get inspired. If you are a parent on the journey to Fi, then come on in. We're glad that you're here. Here are your hosts, Wendy and Tamika.
Hi, House of Fi family. Welcome to the show tonight. It's going to be such a fun time. We have a special guest who's going to talk to us about a few useful topics that we think could be helpful for those pursuing Fi. Crystal Barnett is an attorney in the Virginia area. She is the mom of 2 young ladies and a wife to a naval officer. The thing that makes Crystal so special to me is that she's a longtime friend of mine, and unbeknownst to her or me, she was the first person to credit card hack, the first person I knew with the Southwest Companion Pass, and she's the go-to person for homeschooling for your kids. All of these things can be useful tools within the Fi community. So with that, we welcome Crystal Barnett. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing really well, and we are so glad to talk to you tonight. Usually, we like to start our episodes with asking the guest to tell us a little bit about themselves and about their financial journey.
Okay, well, I think you did a pretty good job summing me up already. So Tamika said, I am a wife to a Navy officer. I have 2 daughters. We live in Virginia. I am a licensed attorney now as of just last year, so I'm a newbie. And in addition to that, my passions enjoy traveling, which we do a lot of as a family, and teaching, which is actually really more of my profession than being an attorney, both to my children and to other children.
So the thing that's really interesting about Crystal's story is that she actually homeschooled her kids for the first 9 years of the oldest one's life. And then in 2013, she started her master's degree and later her law degree. Now she has transitioned into working and teaching in the law practice. So for this episode, we'd love to talk to you more about the homeschooling and get some information about that, but also have some insight into how to make the transition to law school and how to get the master's degree later in life. So can you start by telling us a little bit about homeschooling?
Absolutely. Well, homeschooling has been a really interesting journey for us. We often tell people that the name is a misnomer because we don't do very much schooling at home. In fact, my children do most of their schooling somewhere that's not home, either the car or a library. We've done it in museums, coffee houses. We do field trips. They're part of cooperatives. And so they actually spend a good portion of their time not at home and still schooling. But the beauty of it is that home is the base for their school. We set the foundation, we set the expectations, and it allows us to have more flexibility with their education.
Can I ask Crystal, what was the prompt for homeschooling? Was there some need for your family that prompted the decision, or was that something that you had intended to do before having children?
Actually, my husband and I intended to send our children to public school. I went to public school, he went to public school, and we were both of the mind that public school, worked for us. So we turned out okay. So it can't be that bad. But what prompted our change of mind is when my daughter was 4 years old, she was in public school, preschool, in a modeling classroom where she modeled with children who had special needs. And it was an excellent environment. It was set up like a Montessori school. And we really loved it and she loved it. But at the end of that year, they informed us that she was going to have to go to kindergarten the upcoming September. And most people are happy that their children are going to kindergarten, except for I was very unhappy with that because she was still 4 at the time. She hadn't turned 5 yet. And in Connecticut, where we were living, they have all day kindergarten. And so, I talked it over with my husband and I said, I can't understand the need for my 4-year-old to basically have what is almost a full-time job, 5 days a week, 6 to 7 hours a day outside of the home. And I just didn't see the need for it. I was home at the time. I stayed home with both of my children. I'm actually still staying home, really. And so we don't need childcare And what I really wanted her to have was a good education, but I think that an education can be had with less than 6 or 7 hours of school for a 4-year-old. So we talked about it, and we went back and forth. There was a long discussion because it wasn't something that we had planned on doing, and my husband didn't actually think that I would be able to stick to it, because one of my personality traits is that I start a lot of things, but I don't necessarily finish them. So he was concerned that I wouldn't finish out the school year. So we said, okay, we'll try this 1 year and see how it goes, because we figured if it went poorly, we had nothing to lose. And the next year, when she was 5, we really would send her to school. So that's how it began. And at the time, our plan was to take it 1 year at a time. And if it went well, we would send her to public school when she hit 3rd grade. She is long since past 3rd grade. We didn't send her when she hit 3rd grade. Then we said we would send her when she got to middle school, but then middle school came and we decided no. It's been so great for our family that we, at this point, we're not even considering public school at all.
So, Crystal, I have a question. So because I'm going to, not playing devil's advocate, but I do have questions. And these are questions that I have heard from others who maybe question the decision to homeschool. So what does that mean for, I guess one of the concerns would be socialization.
Socialization, yes. I actually knew you were going to go there.
Right. And the reason is that my husband and I just had this conversation earlier this week. My 6-year-old, my 1st grader, he has special needs. He has ADHD and pretty significant. And I floated the idea of maybe it was better for him to be at home. Just there's not as much stimulus. And that was his concern. What about socialization?
Right. Since I started homeschooling, the question, what about socialization, has come up multiple times. Every time someone finds out that we homeschool, that's almost the first thing they ask. What about socialization? What about socialization? And my response over the years has really kind of, it really comes down to this, which is that as a homeschooler, my child engages with society on a daily level. She goes with me when I go to the grocery store, when I go to the post office. She engages in conversations with other adults. When she goes to co-op, she engages in conversation with not just peers of her own age, but peers of all age groups, which teaches her how to cross-socialize, how to relate to people that are both younger than her and older than her. And while she may not do that the 6 to 7 hours a day that a public schooler does, on the flip side, what you have in public school is not, in my opinion, socialization. When students are told every day to sit still, to stay in their chairs, to not talk to each other, to not have conversations, and to not engage in dialect, they're not engaging in socialization. They're engaging in institutionalization, which is following rules, standing in a line, being told when it is okay to eat, when it is okay to engage, when it is okay to ask questions. So my argument is that my homeschoolers who have not only engaged in social situations with people of all different ages, I would argue that they are more socialized than a student who spends 6 to 7 hours in a classroom environment where they're not allowed to even engage in conversation with others.
I appreciate all that. I think that is, we just don't think about it that way. And
right.
Pointing it out, it all, it all makes much more sense when you hear that.
So I think that the main point that I heard from all of that, and this is because I've been around the kids, I've seen how well socialized they are. I've experienced and asked many questions over the years, so I don't really ask that question anymore. But I think the thing that I realized the most is that you took a very thoughtful approach to raising the children. You tried to find a schooling format that fit your family's needs, and you were willing to take it the 1 year at a time. Many people outside of the FI community get on the hamster wheel and don't take that time to figure out what components of their life they maybe should explore and be more creative about and explore the options for. So that's why, I'm so glad that you're here today to be able to tell that, yes, homeschooling is a misnomer, and that you've had the chance to school them and to expose them to many areas, many locations, many people, and many experiences. One way that I can tie this back to the FIRE movement and the FI movement is that, there's something that you always do that I see other FI people who are traveling do. And so you are able to take the kids when you go to Disney World, which is like 12 times a year.
I wish.
You're able to travel with them. You were able to take them to class with you when you went to law school sometimes.
Yes.
There are places in your world that you're able to expose them to. And I wonder how that's been for you, and if that was something that you quickly learned was a benefit of homeschooling, or if that was something that a positive that you found later on in life.
Right. Well, actually, coincidentally, we've discovered that the very first year. So our very first year that we were homeschooling, which I said, my oldest daughter was 4. She had just turned 5 at the time. And my husband comes home and he says, we are up for orders. We're going to be leaving the area soon. So if there's something that you want to do here on the East Coast, because we were living on the East Coast at the time and we were going to be moving to the West, then we should consider doing that. And I said, wow, that's such a great idea. Let's go on, an impromptu trip sort of thing. And so he goes to the military travel office and he asks around, says, what's fun that can be done. We're pretty flexible with the dates because we homeschool, so we don't need to worry about missing class or whatnot. And he comes home and he says, well, what do you think about a Disney cruise? And I said, oh, wow, that's expensive. Can't afford a Disney cruise. I've heard about them. They're great, but I've heard they're really expensive. And he says, well, if you go the first week in December, apparently, when all of the other children are still in school, then it's considerably cheaper. And so this was, this was probably maybe only a couple of months before the cruise. And I said, well, that sounds great. So granted, Disney did have a military rate for that cruise going at the time. But I think part of what led to the military rate is that overall, the amount of traveling that's done the first week in December is very, very minimal to tourist locations because everyone has either just come back from their Thanksgiving travels or they're preparing for their Christmas travels. So we've learned that you can really take advantage of that time in between to take advantage of some really good rates. And so that was the first year. And actually that same exact year, very soon after, we planned another trip in March, again, because we were so pleased with the fact that travel was so much more economical during these off months. And we took a trip to Hawaii, as it turns out. And again, very low rates for the airplane, very low rates on hotel accommodations because their big season is the summer. And so we've really been taking advantage of that ever since. So now we pretty much have made it our travel schedule for the year is that we typically do not travel during the summer months at all. So between May and September is when we're home the most. We take very few trips. If we do, it might be someplace close by that's within driving distance. Between October and March, if we're taking any vacations, that's probably when they're going to happen. And just as an example, for us right now, between October and March, we have 3 trips that are planned. And they're all during times when students will be in school. And we have one we're taking a week to go to California for my sister's wedding. I'm just kind of extending that out. And then we're going to go to Florida twice, once in November the week before Thanksgiving, and then once in January, the week after the students all go back to school. So taking advantage of those lower rates again.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you do any other form of hacking where do you like credit card hacking for travel or anything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, because we love to travel so much, I do. So I have the credit cards for Delta and for Southwest because those are the 2 airlines that we fly the most. And we have a credit card for Hilton because we typically stay at the Hilton brand hotels. So what I've managed to do is the year before last, actually, I set up the Southwest credit cards when they had a promo running on, bonus miles that you can get. And I worked it out so that I set it up in September. I did all of my Christmas shopping and Thanksgiving, back to school, all of that stuff to travel for that fall between September and December, which allowed me to accrue a huge amount of bonus miles. And then that next January, I spent just enough money to accrue the miles to earn a companion pass on Southwest. So with Southwest, if you accrue, I believe it's like 100,000 miles, then you get a companion pass. Now, the beauty of the companion pass is that it's good until December 31st of the following year, the year after you receive it. So we earned ours in January. So we were able to use ours from January to December of that year and January to December of the following year. And so for those 2 years, my daughter flew free on Southwest. So on every trip that we took on Southwest, we would buy one ticket for my husband who had earned the companion pass. My daughter flew free, and myself and my other daughter, we used the miles, the 100,000 miles that we had received to purchase our tickets. So, and we do the same thing with Delta as well. Actually, this recent flight trip that we're taking to California, Delta, their credit card comes with a free companion pass every calendar year that you have the card. So we used that free companion pass, purchased my husband's ticket, got one ticket free, and then myself and my daughter, again, we used the Delta miles to purchase our tickets to California.
There's two questions that immediately pop up in my mind. And one is, what does the schooling look like when you do your travel? And how has it changed over time? And then the other question, which I can remind you of after you answer the first one, is what are some of the strategies that you use to keep your expenses in order while you're accruing these points?
Okay. So first question in regards to homeschooling and travel. Well, because we learned early on that we enjoy traveling so much, when my children were still young, I said we need to switch over to a year-round schooling. And so like I said, we spend most of our summer at home. So my children do school through the year, all the way until our years go from basically the end of August until the end of July. And they have a 3-week summer break is what we call it in the very beginning of August. But what that allows us to do is that allows for those extended vacations during the traditional school year. And we don't school during those vacation periods. And instead, we make up the schooling on the days that we're home and in the summertime and whatnot. So that's how we work our travel schedule around the schooling. We know in advance typically when we're going to be traveling, so the kids know that they need to, get their work done, or they know that they're going to have a break that they're going to be presented with, so they need to prepare for that and be ready to step back into it after we come back from our trips. The second question, expenses in terms of how to keep it all straight with the credit card hacking. Is that what you're talking about when I'm credit card hacking, like when I'm trying to get the miles?
Yeah, but actually, before you go to that, so you said that they have to figure out their schooling before you actually go on the vacations. Are they taking a test? Do they have to finish some presentations or something? How do you know that they're done before you leave on your vacation?
Oh.
Do you have, do they follow a schedule, or do you have like full flexibility in that way where you can say, all right, you guys are done for a week and then next?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Got it.
It depends. It depends. So their academic courses, which I do all of their academic courses myself at home. We follow a curriculum at home. So for their academic courses, I do set the standards so that I can say, here's what you're supposed to have done by this point or whatever. In terms of like the classes that they take at the co-ops and whatnot, they usually typically allow their teachers, notice that they're going to be gone on these days. And then if they have something that they need to have done before then, because some of them, they do have, like they're in the strings orchestra and they might have like a playing test that's due while we're gone. Well, they're going to need to take care of that before we go. So it just depends on the situation. But yes, in terms of their academic work, I'm in charge of it and I set the schedule. So when I say that they need to be done before we travel, what I really mean is I typically have a point in mind that I feel like they need to get to. One thing that's kind of unusual about their schooling is that because I went to law school, when they were younger and we continued to homeschool, we had to transition to a very independent sort of learning style. So they've become very independent over the years. So for a lot of their schoolwork, I pretty much just give them a lesson plan for the week and say, here is your schoolwork for the week. Here's what needs to be done by the end of the week. And they have a certain number of hours that they work in each day, but they can choose how they allot their time. So sometimes they might take, they might do all of their history homework for the week in one day if they so desire, or they may decide that they don't want to do all of their science in one day, so they'll divide it up between whatever days they want to do it. So they have some flexibility that I allow them to have during their work, getting their work done. The only thing that's not flexible is I do ask that they do math every single day, because if you don't do math every day, you kind of lose that skill. So it becomes a little bit of a struggle. But other than that, so yes, does that answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah, it absolutely does answer the question. You have autonomy to set their schedule or to set the expectation, the final goal or expectation of the week or the 2 weeks or the semester, but then they have the agency to actually figure it out, which teaches great skills. It's one of the hardest things.
You put that so nicely. I just love the way that sounds, the autonomy and the agency. Look, using those big words. I'm just using big words over here. Something about I have autonomy and you have agency. Go look that up.
Oh, we should say that Gabrielle is assisting with the interview,
yes.
Her oldest daughter.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because we've really come to rely on that system of autonomy and agency, as you so nicely put it. But they've really learned to appreciate the sort of independence and flexibility that they have in their schooling. And so just recently, I told them that I wanted to come up with a name for our school because we don't have an official name. And but now that my oldest is getting ready to get into high school and we're thinking about transcripts and those things, I said, we should have a name for our school and maybe a motto or something like that. So why don't we come up with some things? So we planned it. We talked about it back and forth. What are some things that define their learning style, who we are, and what we hope to achieve as a school. And the name that we ended up coming up with is Candid School of Independent Learning. Now, it was really important to them that we called it the School of Independent Learning because they really take pride in the fact that they do learn independently. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because they really do enjoy that, and they take pride in being able to say, I'm able to schedule myself, to moderate myself, to determine what needs to be done, and to take the steps towards achieving my goals.
So just for some practical questions, because I'm sure there are listeners out there who just have no point of reference for homeschooling. And I'm listening and even I have questions and I have a tiny bit of knowledge about it. So how do you decide on curriculum? How did you research curriculum and end up choosing curriculum? And do you go with maybe is there a provider, or do you based upon subjects? How do you pull that all together? And then the second part of that is any of it online?
So to answer your first question, the beauty about homeschooling is that it can be as traditional or as flexible as you want it to be. And what that means is that in terms of curriculum and choosing how they're going to learn and what text they're going to use, there are companies out there who will provide you with everything that you need for an entire year's worth of study. So when I first started homeschooling that very first year in kindergarten, I knew that I had no idea what was going on. And what I wanted more than anything was for someone to tell me, what am I supposed to do every day? What goals my child was supposed to achieve by the end of the year? And how do I make that happen? So I went with the option of a company who provided what they called the kindergarten package. And it had everything in it for reading, for science, for math, everything. Now, over the years, I've kind of come away from that because as we've continued this home education, I've learned more about myself and what I think is important for the children to learn, like where our focus is in our education and the skills that I think that are important for them to have, or the values that I want them to have, or the worldview that I want to impart on them, those things have really had more of a bigger impact on how we've progressed in our schooling. So over the years, I've stepped more away from the package and towards looking at each individual subject and different companies. And it can be very overwhelming, actually. If you're just starting to homeschool, I really don't recommend Googling homeschool curriculum, because you will be in tears and pulling your hair out, because there will be so many and you won't know which one is the right one. So for someone who's listening, who's really interested in learning more about it, I say, find someone that does homeschool and strike up a conversation with them, or join a homeschool Facebook group. The area that I'm currently in has a huge homeschool Facebook group that's a support network, and we get new homeschoolers in that group almost every day that say, I'm thinking about homeschooling, but I don't know where to begin. And we have, there's a lot of community members that will provide direction. And a lot of the things that go into considering the type of curriculum that you want can be something like, are you looking for a religious curriculum, or are you looking for a secular curriculum? Are you looking for a curriculum that's more traditional and book-based with workbooks and textbooks? Or are you looking for a curriculum that's more hands-on? If you have a learner that's more of a kinesthetic learner, are you looking for something that appeals towards that learning style? Because there are math curriculums that appeal to that. There's science curriculums, even handwriting curriculums. So you look at each child, their learning style, and you consider those factors, and you look at yourself and your family and what you all value in education, and you consider those factors. And then you can consider things such as cost, because there are some curriculums out there, there's stuff you can get for free. You can homeschool for nothing. You could homeschool with books from the library and resources that you could find online, or you could homeschool for thousands of dollars, and you could still do that with, curriculum that you order or a program that you do online. So really, at the end of the day, you have to kind of, write for yourself, what are my goals that I hope to achieve with homeschooling? What are my child's learning styles that might affect the type of curriculum that I purchase? And finally, what is my budget? And so over the years, even as I've acquired curriculum for my older daughter and thinking to myself, oh, I can use this again with my younger daughter, there's been a lot of curriculum I haven't reused. And a part of the reason is because they have differing learning styles. And so what worked for my oldest wouldn't necessarily work for my youngest. And so we have to come up with a new plan. And so then I'm back to square one. And again, I consider, what is it that we are hoping to achieve? What will work best with her personality and learning type? And then finally, what is our budget? And so that's how we've kind of come up. And of course, I have a huge support network, and we bounce ideas off of each other all the time. And so when someone tries something and they work, they tell me about it, then I'll say, okay, I'll take a look at it. Or I might say, tell me more about it. Can I see it? Can I borrow it? And you can, they're great resources. And finally, not every community has this, but I want to recommend that if you're interested in looking into homeschooling, that you look and see if there's a homeschool bookstore in your area. We have a very large homeschooling community here, and so we actually have a used homeschool bookstore where you can go and sell back the curriculum that you've already used and purchase curriculum from others who are finished using it. So I get my books used. I try to buy most of my curriculum used. But the most amazing part about that bookstore is that the ladies who work there are all homeschoolers themselves. And between them, they have over 40 or 50 years of homeschooling experience. And so they've tried a lot of curriculum. They've been introduced to a lot of different curriculums, and they're familiar with it. And so you can go and strike up a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm looking for a math curriculum. We tried this other one and it's not working for us. What would you recommend based on my child's age, needs, or whatever? And they can usually give you some good recommendations.
That's wonderful. I was going to ask about the cost, and you answered that. And I imagine that in some of the maybe more informal groups, there's maybe a sharing of curriculum, or, hey, I've got this and we're done with it. Does that happen?
Yes, there is that. So in my area, like our Facebook group is actually two parts. One part of the Facebook group is support, field trips, socialization. Do you want to meet at the park? Those kinds of things. And then there's another sector to the Facebook group, which is the trade. And so we can, you can post curriculum for sale or for trade or whatever. And so if you're looking for something, like, you go there first, because someone probably has something that they're not needing anymore. And if you know what it is that you want, then you can look and see. So yes, there is a lot of passing down, passing on. It's kind of like clothes, like you get the clothes from your friends whose children have outgrown it or things like that. So that does happen a lot. And a lot of times it's kind of a funny thing, but you see so many things you like and then you acquire all of them. And sometimes it's more than you ever need, and you realize you can't even use it with your child. And so then you end up just passing it on to someone else.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you find in all of the FI community, and, being able to share resources and save a little bit of money during the process is also, I mean, why recreate the wheel and why pay extra money while doing it? So
Exactly. Yes. And actually there's a website online where homeschoolers can join the website, and what they're doing is they're purchasing things in bulk so that you can get the group discount or the bulk discount. So they do have companies that work with them to allow them to purchase items in bulk so they can get that discount, because each of us, we are our own school, but we're not a school. So we don't always get the school discount. However, I will say that many, many places will give you the field trip rate or school discount or teacher's discount if you homeschool. And so I take advantage of that a lot. I have a teacher's education card for Barnes & Nobles. I have one for Office Max. I use the field trip rate when we go to places like parks and things like that. So a lot of them will acknowledge homeschooling as a school and the parent as the teacher. And so you can take advantage of those discounts.
just quickly before we move to the next topic, do the girls have to show any proof of learning or testing the same way that, my daughter's in the 5th grade and she has to do MCAS and they're teaching to the math this year? Do they have to do any of that?
It depends on the state that you're living in. So for us personally, yes, we do. The state of Virginia does require us to show proof of progress, but it does not have to be in the form of a test. So it can be in the form of an evaluation, like they can submit themselves to an evaluation from someone who has a master's degree or higher, and they can show the work that they've done in order to show that they have achieved progress for their grade level. Us personally, we do test. I believe that the testing experience is a good experience for them to have, because they're going to need it later when they're doing the SATs or the GREs or whatever other standardized test is required for them to do anything in life, basically. So they've been testing every year since kindergarten. So we test in June, and we are required to submit our results by August. So every year they take the ITBS test or they take the Sanford test, which I believe are pretty common tests in the school systems as well, but we can purchase it as a homeschooler. And as long as you have someone who's licensed to proctor those tests, or I guess is qualified as a proctor, then they'll proctor the test for you. And then you just submit the results. So yes, they do test standardized testing, just like your daughter, but just once a year, as opposed to here in Virginia, I think they take multiple tests a year. So,
Yeah, it's quite a bit. I know we still have a little bit more time, but I did want to shift a little, because one thing that the listeners may not know is that you went from being a stay-at-home mom, and we graduated together. You were a stay-at-home mom, and then you did this magical thing where you went back to law school and to get your master's degree in education at the same time, unannounced, out of the blue, the same way you usually do everything else in your life. So one of the cool things that happened, though, was that you actually got quite a scholarship to law school. And the other thing is that you took the girls to law school for a part of it. You were able to have them in some of your classes and expose them to that. So I don't know, where do you want to start? What can you tell us about going back to school after being out and restarting a career?
Well, I don't know about restarting a career. I'm sort of in transition right now, but in terms of going back to school, it's really, I know you like to say it was out of the blue and out of nowhere, and that's actually very true, because when we moved to Virginia in 2012, it was in June, and I thought to myself, well, the kids are getting a little bit older now. And so I'm still staying at home, but maybe it's time for me to start, doing something for myself. And so we happen to live down the street, from the school that I ended up attending. And I was driving by it back and forth. And I was like, well, maybe I should just see what kind of programs they have at this school. So I went online, and it's like, oh, lo and behold, they have this master's in education. And I'm thinking to myself, I've been homeschooling now at that time, I think I'd been homeschooling 6 years. No, maybe 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And I was like, well, that's educating. So maybe I should learn more about this whole education process. So I'll get a master's in education, and then who knows where I can go from there. So that was in July, yes, it was in July. And like the crazy person that I am, I signed up to take the GRE 2 weeks from then. And at the same time, I put in my application, and I told the school, look, I'll get all my stuff together. Is there any way I can start in August? And the school said, okay, sure. We'll put you on, provisional admission. We'll give you 1 semester to kind of work things out and see where it goes from there. So I started school that August, a month and a half after I decided that I was going to go back to school to get my master's of education. And it was a mostly online program, except for there were a couple of classes that I decided to take in person. And one of them was a class that was being offered through the University School of Government, because my master's of education is actually an independent, I think it was called like a master's of education and independent studies or something like that. Basically, instead of becoming licensed to teach like most people would, I just wanted to get the master's, but I didn't want to become licensed. And so I told them that I was interested in concentrating my education on gifted education, higher education, and also on government, because that's what my undergraduate degree is. And I thought in my head, maybe someday in the future, I would teach a government class. So high aspirations, I know. So I aspired to be a government teacher. And so I took the 2 classes at the School of Government. And while I was there during my second semester that spring, the professor who was teaching that class, who was also a law school professor, asked me if I considered going to law school. And I said, well, no, because I'm very busy with my life. I have 2 children that I homeschool. I run half marathons. I enjoy traveling with my family. And the last I heard, law school is a life-sucking, bank account-sucking, happiness-sucking experience. And since I didn't really care for any of those things, thanks, but no thanks. So that was kind of my first introduction to the idea of going to law school.
Wendy, would you concur with the life-sucking?
Life-sucking, bank-sucking, finance-sucking, happiness-sucking. It was pretty much, it just, so I wasn't really interested in it. But as it turns out, he didn't let it go. He brought it up again a couple of months later before the class was over. And he said, you really should think about it. I think you'd be very good. And I said, well, I have some barriers, one of which is that law school is very expensive. And so I can't really afford to be spending, $100,000 on a law degree when I have children who are coming up who will be attending college before I know it. And he said, well, go, if you study for the LSAT and you do really well, then you might get a scholarship that would help pay for that. And at that time, I'd never even seen an LSAT. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I don't know how that's going to go. But I talked it over with my husband, and he said, you should at least try. So I did. I started studying for the LSAT in April, I believe. And again, as is true to my style, I started studying for the LSAT in April, and at the same time put in my application for law school. And I took the June LSAT, and I was admitted after that LSAT, and I started law school in August.
That's nuts.
So there you go.
That's complete nuts.
Yeah, it sounds a little crazy, right?
Just a bit.
So,
and at the same time, I hadn't even finished my master's of education. So I had to do them both. Like once I started law school, I had to do law school, but also finish my master's degree.
I don't know how you did it. I know when I started law school, my first year, then I didn't have all the children. I only had my oldest at that time, and my husband was working, and I started part-time at first, but even going part-time.
So did I, part-time. Yep.
I can vividly remember several occasions where I'm walking back to my car just bawling because what did I do?
Yeah. What did I get myself into? What was I thinking?
And I'm the dumbest person on the planet. Like I don't even belong here. And yeah, it was pretty traumatic. So for you to,
Yeah, well, I think the first year of law school is traumatic for everyone. And I do have to say that, it's all good now, but at the time that it was happening, it was very, very rough. It was hard. It was hard for my children because I'd never had a job outside the home. So law school was pretty much like a job, and they were crying all the time. Every time I left, they would cry and say, "Why are you doing this? Why are you leaving us? Why do you have to go?" My mom came to stay with us to help with the kids because we were still homeschooling at the time. And so it was very appreciative. We really couldn't have done it if she hadn't come, because I'm not sure what our plan would have been for the kids for that. But it was really trying time for my family, and at the same time, I was still trying to do all of the things that I used to do before I was in law school, and go to law school and do the law school homework. And finally, there was a point where, my husband and my mom and, everybody was just like, "Look, you're going to have to accept that you cannot do it all. You cannot go to class all day and then, come home and make dinner and clean the house and then do your homework and then get up and, do it all again, buy groceries or whatever. People are, we're going to have to help you." And so it was hard. It was a hard transition. I think my kids felt that I had abandoned them. But in hindsight, it turned out to be one of the best experiences for my family. Everyone ended up stronger because of it. We became stronger as a family unit because of it. I learned to accept help from my husband, and my children learned to become more independent because they had to. But I think it was something that I wouldn't have allowed to happen had I been home. Like I was still making their lunches for them, and what do you want to eat for lunch today? And let me sit by you while you do your schoolwork. And now all of a sudden they're learning to do things like, wow, we need to learn to pick up our own stuff. And maybe we're old enough to make our own lunch and those kinds of things. And that's really carried over in our family. And I just really appreciate what that experience has been for us. And after the first year of law school, I brought my children to law school pretty often. Sometimes they would come to sit in class. But a lot of times they came for my extracurriculars. I participated in the Child Advocacy Board, and they would come and watch my practices. They came to my competitions. They would come to functions that we had. And so again, back to that question of socialization, like, are my girls socialized? Well, they spent a good portion of time of their childhood in law school, where they interacted with other law students, and they knew the other students by name, and the students knew them by name, and they would have conversations with them and hang out with them. And so I think, yes, they have had a pretty well-rounded socialization, experience.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
So yes, that is so awesome. And I didn't mean to cut everybody off. Before we move on, I did want to say one of the things that you told me about that I didn't know about was the LSAT and the LSAT score and how important it is.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking of anyone who
Yes.
maybe is listening that doesn't have children, so they're not thinking about the homeschool portion, but they're maybe thinking about law school. Can you explain that and the connection to scholarships?
Yes. So the LSAT, the law school admissions test, I actually tutor people in that still, and I teach workshops from the school that I attended. I teach LSAT workshops there. And what I always tell people is the amount of time that you spend studying ahead of time will lead to money down the road, because the higher your LSAT score is, and pretty much, as you want to get the highest score you possibly can, but anything that's above what your law school, like whatever law school it is that you're planning on attending, anything that's above what is required for you to gain admission to law school can translate into scholarship money. So people, one of the first questions I always get asked is, well, what score do I need to get into law school? And my response is, do you want to know the score you need to get into law school, or do you want to know the score that you need so that you can get a great deal in law school. And those are two different things, right? So there are some schools that will accept a 155, which that's out of 180. The scale is 120 to 180. So there are some schools that will accept a 155. And when you get into law school, sure. But will you be paying for it yourself? Yeah, probably. But if you took the time to study ahead of time, get a tutor, take a class, and I know that the classes are expensive, but if you, again, think about that cost-benefit analysis down the road, your $1,000 class may end up leading you to $10,000 or $20,000 worth of scholarship money. So you do the work ahead of time, study now, take the class, get a higher LSAT score, and anything above what's required for you to get in, that's what schools look at to determine scholarship money, what law schools look at. And part of the reason for that is because, a lot of people say, well, I have a really high undergraduate GPA or this, that, or the other, and that's all well and good. But the LSAT is the equalizer. It's what law schools can look at, and they can compare everyone to each other because everyone has to take the LSAT. Your 3.8 from one school, may mean something different from 3.8 at another school, but your 170 on the LSAT, it will always mean 170 on the LSAT. And so that's why law schools use that in order to determine scholarship money. And so that's why it's really important. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important it is if you want to make yourself available for that scholarship money, then you want to achieve the highest score that you possibly can on the LSAT. And one of my criteria personally, when I applied for law school and took the LSAT, again, like I said earlier, I said I didn't have the money set aside for law school. First of all, because it wasn't planned. My children are getting ready to go to college themselves. My husband does have a GI Bill, but we've since transferred that to our children, and I didn't want to use it. And so I said, either I get some scholarship money and then I'm going to law school, or I don't get money and I'm not going to law school. So for me, it was really important that I scored high enough to get that scholarship money, which I obviously did because I went to law school. So I think that it's definitely something that people should consider, ponder hard, and think about. I know it's expensive, taking an LSAT class or hiring an LSAT tutor or whatever the case may be, but it can, the benefits can be, much more than the cost in the beginning.
I'm so glad that you shared that information. I know that I didn't have that information when I went to law school, and I still have these huge law school bills. And so, I would have just thought, though, it's just one of those things you have to pay. And I think that because in a lot of places, practice of law has become so saturated that the higher paying jobs are not always available. And so people coming out of law school thinking that they're going to, get out of law school and make, the six digits, and finding that, no, you're actually probably going to get like maybe mid $50,000. And
oh, wow. That's very good for you all. Cause in my area, a recent law school graduate might be making about 30, 35.
Exactly. So doing whatever you can to minimize the cost of that education is critical. And I wish that I had known, but I mean, hindsight's 2020. There's nothing I can do about it. But that's wonderful advice for people who are considering law school. On the schools that you're considering, do most of them have that information readily available where you can go to maybe like their financial aid tab and it will say that these are the scholarships available depending on this range of LSAT score? Or is that something that they might have to dig deeper to find out about?
So I think it depends on the school, but a lot of schools do have, if you go to their financial aid tab, it might not say the score that they're looking for, but it'll tell you the scholarships that they have available to award. And a lot of those will be based on things like, I think there was actually a few of them on that for the school that I attended. I think it did say based on LSAT score for incoming first years. So if you go and look at the school, you can see, like you click on the financial aid tab because everyone's looking for, money to help make law school more affordable. And I think law schools understand that. And it's been interesting, but around the same time that I was applying to law school, one of the reasons my professor told me that it was a perfect time to apply was because, like you said, there's such a saturation of attorneys that there was a slump in law school admissions. And so law schools were kind of in a period where they were doing whatever they could to gain more students. And so they really were doling out this money. And even now, although they've kind of recouped a little bit, the classes have gotten a little bit bigger. I think that many law schools are still feeling this pressure of how do we attract the best students, the students with the highest scores and those kinds of things. And so there are a lot of endowed scholarships, I think, that are available. And some of them, they just range in amounts. Maybe they're a yearly scholarship, or maybe they're, a lump sum scholarship. But I think that that many schools do have the financial aid available. You just have to know where to look for or where to find it. And it was interesting for me, actually, but when I first started, I was awarded one lump sum scholarship that was to be, divided between my 3 years of school, but it didn't quite pay for everything. And so when I called my financial aid advisor and I said, it's almost there, but I still have just this little bit more here. And she said, well, let me look and see what other scholarships haven't been awarded yet that you might be eligible for. And as it turned out, there was a scholarship that was being provided by a local law firm, but it was a diversity scholarship. And so this law firm was trying to encourage diversity in the legal community, and they wanted the scholarship had to be for someone of an ethnic background who had scored well on the LSAT, so forth and so on. And even though it was the month before school started, they still hadn't awarded it to anyone because no one had met the criteria. And so in that situation, she said, well, there's this scholarship available. You'll need to contact the law firm and write them a thank you letter and all that good stuff because they're the ones who are applying it. So that scholarship didn't even really come from my school. That scholarship came from a law firm. And I think that there are a lot of situations like that where you can look outside of your school even for scholarships that are available. And someone asked me the other day, well, how do you find the best scholarships and even for undergraduate? And I said, well, you think of all the categories that you fall into. Like, are you a female? Are you, as part of a particular ethnic group? What's your religion? What about the occupations of your parents, your family, or, has someone been in military service? All of those things. And then you Google, is there a scholarship that applies to this particular type of person? My second year in law school, I actually, even though I already had the original scholarship, I applied for a different scholarship at the end of my first year to go towards my second year. And the reason why I applied for that scholarship was because it was a full scholarship that covered all of my tuition, but it also provided a book stipend. And so I was really interested in that because law school books are really expensive. And so I said to my financial aid advisor, I said, well, I want to apply for this scholarship, but if I do, what happens to my other scholarship? And she said, well, we'll put it on hold for you if you get it, and you can just have it back again in your third year. And so I said, okay, great. Well, the interesting thing about that scholarship was, again, it had a criteria, which was that you had to be a native resident of one of 5 cities and something else or another. And so I said, well, I meet that criteria. So I applied for the scholarship and I was awarded that scholarship. So my second year of law school, I actually used a scholarship that was not provided by my law school. It was provided by the university as a whole. And it paid for my entire tuition plus books and stipends for the fall, spring, and summer semester. So I took full advantage of that and took, as many hours as I could that year.
That's really great. Okay, Crystal, so I'm going to ask you some of our closeout questions that we ask all of our guests. And so the first one is, what was one lesson you learned about money or finances, good or bad, growing up that you have carried over into your adult life?
I think that one lesson that I've learned, it's probably a two-parter, but it's that, one, know how much you're spending, be aware of what you're spending on, but also remember that money can be replaced, but memories cannot.
We've touched on that in a few different episodes and really considering experiences. And so, making sure it's okay to spend money on your kids. No one's saying that that's not okay, but also just understanding that it doesn't necessarily always take money to create.
Right.
And then the second question is, let's pretend that your children are listening. Well, one may be listening.
They've actually been listening the whole time. The other one came in halfway through. So
I don't know if they can hear my side of it, but they're going to hear your side of it. So this is perfect.
Okay.
So let's pretend your children are listening and you have their ear and undivided attention. What is one lesson about money that you would want to convey to them that they would carry into their adulthood?
So I knew that you were going to ask this question, but I still didn't have an answer. And I thought that maybe by the time you asked me in real life, I would have an answer for you. We talk a lot about money and finances and stuff. So I'm trying to think of like something that I've said repeatedly to them.
Well, I think that that's a lesson in of itself. A lot of parents that come on our show, or, not even a lot of parents, but a lot of our experiences and a lot of the people who come on our show maybe didn't have those financial discussions from a young age and still haven't had them. So that is a lesson in of itself to learn from those around you.
I honestly, I think it goes back to the answer to my first question, which is to be aware and knowledgeable of your finances and your expenses. So ever since they've been young, I've drilled into them the concept of things like interest that you would have to pay if you have a credit card versus interest the bank pays you if you save your money. We've talked about, what happens when you charge something to that credit card. It doesn't just go away into nothingness. You still have to pay for that down the road, and you need to be aware of whether or not you have the money in your bank account to pay for that right now. One thing that we've done is something that my mom did for me and which I'm doing for my children is giving them their own credit cards to help them build their credit now. Credit's important, and they should have credit by the time that they leave the house, in my opinion. That way they can use their credit wisely instead of, being first exposed to a credit card when they go to college and then they rack up this huge bill and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I had to pay for it, or whatever the case may be. So I gave my oldest daughter her first credit card last year, and my younger one will get her first credit card next year. And it's for emergencies mostly, but it's this idea and this concept, like you need to be responsible for your credit card, for how you spend the money, and just be aware of those kinds of things. So I think the lesson that I would want them to take away is to be knowledgeable, to never stop gaining knowledge, and that would allow them to be able to use their money more effectively, I think, and on things that they would enjoy using it on.
Let me ask you this, Crystal. So is it their own credit card, or are you adding them like as an authorized?
Yep. So she's added on as an authorized user. And so it's not her own credit card. She just has her name is on the credit card with my husband and I on our account, but it still shows up as, on her credit report as an account that she's had open. And my mom did this for me when I was 12. And the beauty of that was, my husband and I married very young, right after college, actually. And so we pretty much became adults right then. But I was able to do things like apply for an apartment, to get a lease for an apartment, purchase a car, do all of those things. And I could do them all in my name because I already had credit built up and I had a good credit score as it turned out. And so I was able to use those things to kind of give us, it was a boost. It was a jump start for us, from financially, because I already had that foundation. And so people could look at me and say, okay, she's not high risk or whatever. She does have good credit. And so we were able to build off of that.
I think that's an awesome tip, because, you said it before, you don't want them to not have any knowledge about how credit works and then get to college where they want to be independent and get these credit cards because, they're getting all the pressure to open them, and then they make mistakes. So I love the idea, and, you're teaching them, how interest works and why you should pay your credit card off every single month. So I just love that. I think that's a great tip. You don't have a website or anything like that, but if what we talked about sparked some interest in some of our listeners and they wanted to reach you, is there a way for them to reach you, maybe like on Facebook or any other social media?
Yeah, so I'm not really on social media. I do have a Facebook account, but it's mostly monitored by my husband. Well, my email address is and it's Crystal, which is my name, so CRYSTAL @ mrsbarnett.cool, COOL.
That is cool. I like that.
Yes. It's a website I set up because I teach high schoolers, and so all of their school stuff, all of their things that I give them for school are on that website. But last year they complained that the website address was too difficult to memorize. So now I just made it easier. So I'm like, your teacher is Mrs. Barnett. That's me. And of course I'm cool. So Mrs. Barnett, that cool.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. There's just so much good stuff here. And I think that on any one of the topics, probably another 30 minutes or so. Just
Yes.
valuable information. Really enjoyed what you had to say today.
Well, I've enjoyed being on the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, normally that would be the end of our show, but on today's episode, we have some bloopers and some bonus material for you. Stay tuned.
Okay, I might just do one other goodbye.
Yeah, go ahead.
What,
Okay.
Tanika? What do you want?
Sorry.
What are you doing?
Sorry. Okay, here I go.
Okay.
Well, Crystal, I knew that this episode was going to be wonderful, and you really gave our listeners very useful and very impactful tips that I know will change the way they think about their fire journeys. There's something in this episode for everyone, from how to approach education for your children to how to travel hack, how to transition from home back into the workforce, even how to qualify for law school scholarships. So thank you so much for imparting all of your wisdom on us today.
You're very welcome.
You can't laugh.
I'm sorry. You. Oh my God. See, look at you. You broke character. You're very welcome. Should I not mention the part about where you twisted my arm into doing this interview? Is that no? Okay. I'll keep that one to myself.
Wendy,
Yeah.
the hack was that she gets HelloFresh, and the kids, that's how they learned to cook. So she gets it, and a few times a week, they learn.
So what we did was, the hack there is that we decided, and I guess I never mentioned this in the episode, but I kind of did. One of our educational goals for our children is to be able to live independently.
Okay, wait.
What?
What is one life hack that you think other parents could benefit from that would also bring joy and fulfillment into their lives?
Teaching your children how to cook. And I know it sounds like a lot, but one of the things that we want our children to do, one of our major goals as parents for us is that we want to teach our children to live independently. And so we try to really instill them with life skills. And they're at the age now where we think that they should learn how to cook. But I enjoy cooking. But I don't follow very many recipes. And so my children really don't enjoy cooking with me, because whenever we're making something, they say, well, what do I do here? And I just say, well, you just put a little bit of this in it, and then you sprinkle some of that, and then you taste it. And they were like, well, how much? And then what? And whatnot. So finally, I decided that what they needed was a basic, they needed Julia Childs, but that seemed like a little bit difficult. So what they needed was basic recipes with ingredients laid out and step-by-step instructions on how to slice the zucchini or oil the pan or whatever the case may be. Things that were that come so second nature to me that I don't realize that needs to be done, but which they couldn't understand needed to be done, which is why we could never get along in the kitchen. So I signed us up for HelloFresh, and what we've done is, the beauty about HelloFresh is that it has all the ingredients that they need to make the recipe. It's simple to make, and best of all, their recipe cards come with step-by-step instructions with pictures. And so they can easily follow the instructions and make these dishes. And when we first started doing this at the beginning of the year, I don't order it every week because it's kind of pricey. And sometimes I only order about maybe like twice a month, because I'll just skip the weeks that we have it delivered. But when we first started doing this, we would do it as a family, and we would show them, we write the recipes with them, and then we say, okay, here's what they mean. Here's how you do this step. Here's how you follow these instructions. And after we'd been doing this for a few months, they got really good at it. And so they were learning to follow the recipes. They were understanding cooking skills. What does it mean to saute? How do you oil something before you put it in the oven? And all these kinds of things. And so we did that for a little while. And then recently, this past summer, after they've become comfortable in the kitchen, we've instituted a new family policy, which is that one night a week, each of them has to cook dinner separately by themselves, and they're responsible for making the entire meal. So they pick a recipe or something that they choose to make, and the criteria is that the recipe has to be a well-balanced meal. So there should be a protein of some sort, a vegetable or a starch, and also you have to have your recipe approved by me 48 hours before the day you're supposed to cook, so that I have time to purchase the ingredients, and you have to provide me with a list of whatever it is that you need that we don't have at home. And then you need to make sure that you set aside enough time to begin dinner and have it completed by dinner time, right? Because we don't want to eat at 9 o'clock at night. And the recipe has to match. The recipe has to match your cooking style. So whatever it is you're making, like you can't make hot dogs because you can do more than make hot dogs, or you can't serve me scrambled eggs for dinner because that's not even a complete meal. And so currently one daughter has Sunday night and one daughter has Wednesday night. And so what they do is they often go through the old HelloFresh recipes that we've received. And I actually just restarted our HelloFresh subscription just this past week because we're getting back into like activities and things like that. And so it seems like it would be a good little transition period. So our HelloFresh box came today. Today was my oldest daughter's day to cook. So she opened up the box, she picked the recipe, she pulled out all the ingredients that she needed for it. At 4:45, she began making dinner. She's responsible for all the prep work, finding the pans that she needs, cooking the recipe, following the instructions, and serving it. And today we ate dinner at 5:45, actually. So she did a really good job. She made pork carnita tacos, like street tacos with like pickled onions and some sour cream crema or chipotle crema or something like that. I don't remember what the recipe was. But yesterday, my youngest daughter made dinner, and she actually followed, we have a whole lot of Pampered Chef recipe books from back when I used to sell Pampered Chef, and they also have very easy to follow recipes, but she made a spinach and feta frittata with chicken sausage for dinner. And it was also very good. And it was different because I actually never make frittata. So I was really surprised that she decided to go with that one. But she pulled out the mandolin slicer and sliced the potatoes and all of that good stuff. So it's been a great learning lesson for everyone. I think my kids have learned that they can actually cook more than they thought they could. It allows them to gain those skills in a safe environment. There's always either myself or my husband, we stay in the kitchen just to make sure that they're not endangering themselves. But for the most part, we let the chips fall where they may. If I see that they're missing an ingredient or they forgot to follow a step in the recipe, I don't say anything because I think the best learning lesson for them is to realize later on that they messed up if it doesn't taste the way that they expect it to. But so far, everything has been pretty delicious, and I've been surprised with that. So no complaints, and it's made life a lot easier. And also, as a mom, I love it because that's 2 nights a week where I know I don't have to make dinner.
Well, House of Five family, that brings this episode to a close. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe in iTunes, as well as any of the other platforms you've found us on. We're on just about all of them. Also, please leave us a written review. They help us to know what you're liking about the show, what we can do better. And for every 5 reviews we receive, that's written reviews, we will give away one of our favorite reads, and that is currently Kids' Money Habits by Amy Coit. It's a great book full of great information, both for parents and kids. Don't forget to check out our show notes on the webpage. There is always bonus information there that didn't make it to the show, and we strive to create good content on there. So please head on over to the website and check that out. Finally, you can find us on Facebook. You can either like our page or you can become part of our Facebook group. It's a private group, and in there we have ongoing discussions about each episode as well as other topics within the FI community. It's a way for us to get to know each other better and for Tamika and I to learn exactly what you want to hear more of or questions that you have that we can address with upcoming guests. Again, thank you for listening. Come back next week. We're glad you're here.